Alice Malsenior Walker was born on February 9, 1944, in Eatonton, Georgia. She was born in the midst of World War II and was also the youngest daughter of a poor sharecropper family. She lived through the heart of the civil rights and women's rights movements, a time in which her race and gender was the topic of controversy. At the age of 8 years, Walker was shot in the right eye with a BB pellet while playing with two of her brothers. A white scar tissue formed in her damaged eye, and she became overwhelmingly self-conscious. She was so ashamed of her disoriented face, she began to isolate herself in her writing and tune out the vicious world around her. After enough silence, Walker became active in the civil rights movement, and later wrote the book she's most known for, The Color Purple. The book highlights the struggles of black women living in the rural South during the first half of the 20th century. Letter number 1. You better never tell nobody but God. It kill your mammy. Dear God, I'm 14 years old. I've always been a good girl. Maybe you can give me a sign letting me know what is happening to me. Last spring after Little Luscious came, I heard them fussing. He was pulling on her arm. She say it too soon. Fonzo, I ain't well. Finally, he leave her alone. A week go by, he pulling on her arm again. She say, nah, I ain't gonna. Can't you see I'm already half dead? And all these children? She went to visit her sister doctor over Mackin. Left me to see after the others. He never had a kind word to say to me. Just say, you gonna do what your mammy wouldn't. Here we're introduced to the horrific life of the main character, Celie. She writes letters to God in question of why her life turns the directions it does. She writes to God because she doesn't believe there's anyone else who cares about her. As Celie's mother can no longer fulfill the pleasures Fonzo seeks, he turns to Celie and forces himself upon her. As the story progresses, Celie learns to push down the painfully oppressive memories and stand up for herself. The story's plot takes many different turns, but is all connected through the author's thematic shifts and style of writing.
One of the many ways Walker's book has become classic literature is the way she effectively shows that an African American person is speaking. She does it with the words she chooses to use, like you instead of your, and by spelling words in a way so the pronunciation is altered. She demonstrates this difference when Celie's husband, Mr. Blank, is speaking to her. You black, you poor, you ugly, you a woman. Goddamn, he say, you nothing at all. Walker tells the story with letters addressed to God that have bad spelling and grammar to emphasize that Celie is uneducated. At first, Celie's letters are short and bring up topics very quickly without fully explaining them. It's only until towards the end of the book that Celie expands in her writing to her sister Nettie, and this could be due to the transformation she has gone in her life and how happy and carefree she is now. Her transformation comes from many things, but most importantly from rejecting the violence she has grown accustomed to, and by altering her view of God and embracing the love she never knew existed. A lot of the book focuses on how black female characters that are victims, while men, many times their own husbands, try to show their dominance by beating and raping their wives. Not only oppressed by her father and husband, but by all men, Celie rebels against God, who she views as an old white man. Her whole outlook on life changes when she begins to think of God as not having a gender and not having a race, but instead of being something who wants people to enjoy the beauty of life, such as the color purple. With the help of Shug Avery, she realizes God ain't a he or a she, but an it. It ain't something you can look at apart from anything else, including yourself. I believe God is everything, say Shug. Everything that is, or ever was, or ever will be. This transformation changes how Celie views her race and also how she learns to love. In the beginning, it is hard for her to be a black woman, but as the book goes on, she becomes proud of her ethnic heritage, especially as she hears of her sister, Nettie's adventures in Africa. One of the major themes in The Color Purple is love, specifically Celie's lack of feeling it. Nettie has been the only person Celie has ever loved, and she demonstrates this unconditional love by sacrificing herself to marry Mr. Blank, even though he wanted Nettie. She does this so Nettie can have an opportunity to educate herself and get out of the cycle of life her mother and now Celie has to go through. This lack of love begins in her home and only continues when she moves into Mr. Blank's home and feels nothing for him or his children. Everybody say how good I is to Mr. Blank's children. I be good to them, but I don't feel nothing for them. Patting Harpo back, not even like patting a dog, more like patting another piece of wood. Not a living tree, but a table, a chifforobe. Anyhow, they don't love me neither, no matter how good I is. With this lack of love, Celie has never felt anyone respect her and therefore hasn't respected herself. In the beginning of the book, Celie lets her father, her husband, and his children treat her however they want. She allows her husband to beat her and doesn't fight back because all her life she has been told she is nothing. It is only when she is introduced to Harpo's, Mr. Blank's son, wife Sophia, and Mr. Blank's ex-lover, Shug Avery, that she sees women who value themselves and who fight back. In a conversation with Sophia, she reveals her true feelings when she says, "I'm jealous of you. I say it because you do what I can't." "What that?" she say. "Fight," I say. Her new role models change Celie, and she finds her strength in all the women coming together and finally taking charge of their lives, even through all the hardship they have experienced.
After being separated from her sister Nettie for years, a letter from Nettie finally reaches Celie with Shug Avery's help. Through these letters, Celie learns about Nettie's life from the last day they saw each other to present time. Celie learns that Nettie is now part of a family with 2 children that turned out to be Celie's children from when she was raped by Fonzo. These letters now go back and forth between the sisters as they communicate and try to reunite. However, until the day comes, Celie must still face the challenges with herself and others around her as she tries to gain control of her life and find love she never received or felt. Celie grows closer to Shug but has an internal battle with herself as she states, "And I try to teach my heart not to want nothing it can't have." This becomes very significant because it describes how strongly Celie's feelings have become for Shug Avery. Celie has never loved anyone besides her sister, making the experience new to her, but allowing her to transform from a restrained, obedient woman to an emotional, free-feeling woman. From there on, Celie begins to fight for a better life as she finally gains the courage to stand up to Mr. Blank and say, "I curse you, I say." "What that mean?" he say. "I say, until you do right by me, everything you touch will crumble." He laugh. "Who you think you is?" he say. "You can't curse nobody. Look at you. You black, you poor, you ugly, you a woman. Goddamn," he say, "you nothing at all." Mr. Blank is still trying to oppress Celie the way he usually does, but Celie has realized her self-worth and has now grown as both an individual and as a woman. She no longer listens to Mr. Blank and decides on her own to move out with Shug Avery, where she creates a successful company making pants and finds love and peace within herself instead of others. Towards the end, Shug Avery tells Celie, "I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and don't notice it." In this context, Shug uses the color purple to represent all the good in the world, because although Celie's life was one of the toughest ones to live, there was still some good to it, and Shug wanted to remind Celie of the good things to come. Another major symbol is Celie's successful business making pants, as it is a representation of power. Celie was never allowed to wear pants because Mr. Blank never approved of it, but as she gained more confidence and control, pants became her escape to become the powerful woman she never thought she would be.
Later in the story, Shug breaks it to Celie that she is leaving her for another guy named Germain. Germain is very young, and Shug says that it makes her feel young as well. This is perceived by Celie as no more than a fling. Celie does not take the news lightly. It is very hard for her to bear, as Shug has been a very important guide and influence in Celie's life. However, Celie's acceptance of Shug moving on to a different lover acts as a very empowering exhibition of Celie's growth. Before, Celie was a lost individual who would not know what to do with herself if faced with this situation. Now, she has amassed the confidence and strength to carry on knowing that she doesn't have Shug tied down. This also shows that Celie's view of what love is has changed. She no longer views love as possession and control, but as something that is meaningful in a pure regard. Celie recognizes that she can still love Shug despite her decision to be with somebody else, which proves Celie's newfound independence. Because they were both turned down by Shug, Celie is later able to empathize with Mr. Blank. This is a significant turning point for Celie, as she recognizes that Mr. Blank committed many wrongs. The reconciliation that Celie goes through to have a platonic relationship with Mr. Blank also shows the massive journey of self-resolution that Celie has been on throughout the entire book. After Shug tires of her new relationship with Germain and returns home, she learns of Celie's newfound friendship with Mr. Blank and becomes jealous, but Celie assures her that it is platonic. In Celie's last letter, she writes, "When Nettie's foot come down on the porch, I almost die. I stand swaying tween Albert and Shug. Nettie stands swaying tween Samuel, and I reckon it must be Adam. Then us both start to moan and cry. Us totter toward one another like us used to do when us was babies. Then us feel so weak when us touch, us knock each other down. But what us care?" Celie's final letter is an extremely important cornerstone to the entire novel. Written to God, it describes the emotional reunion of her and her sister Nettie. In this letter, Celie shows her understanding that God is a part of her and is unique to her individuality. This is easily seen because she opens the final letter with, "Dear God, dear stars, dear trees, dear sky, dear peoples, dear everything, dear God." It is evident to the reader that Celie sees God in all of these things that she mentions. Celie is now thinking in a deeper way, going from someone who viewed God as an old white man to something that is more of a spiritual essence. This book is about transformation. In the beginning, Celie's letters were disjointed and merely summaries of what was happening in her life. Towards the end, Seeley's letters became more self-reflective and emotionally conclusive. This self-transformation that Seeley undergoes is what drives Walker's central message. The Color Purple is a book that shows its readers that no matter how hard the circumstances of an individual, self-satisfaction and peace are attainable as long as one is trying their hardest to succeed. Though the novel doesn't end with Seeley's life being in a perfect place, it is evident that she is going to be okay, which is more than what could be said about the beginning of the book.